Oh man, today is a really special day. I am super excited for today's review, and my cameraman Cole behind the camera, he's just as excited. Okay, calm down. So, in case you were too lazy to look at the title of this video, I'll just say the review right now. Today, we are looking at the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. So, that's pretty self-explanatory, and let's hop into it. This is Skyrim.
It's really hard to believe that Skyrim was released almost 6 years ago. It was developed by Bethesda Game Studios, a company that is also responsible for the Fallout series. I remember that the hype for Skyrim was massive, so much so that it was critically appraised as soon as it was released. My reaction during that time, however, was lackluster. I never heard about the Elder Scrolls series until Skyrim, and even then I didn't buy it until a friend at the time pressured me into getting it on PC. Even now, Skyrim is still the only Elder Scrolls game I've played, so I can't really compare its context to the previous games, Oblivion and Morrowind. I do have both of these games, but I just haven't had the time to play them. In Skyrim's case, I'll be looking at the PlayStation 3 version for a couple simple reasons. DX Story, my recording software, doesn't handle Skyrim very well, and this isn't even getting into the shit it's been giving me for the other games I've tried recording, such as Team Fortress 2. The other reason is that if you've watched Fawful's Minions' top 10 overpowered game mechanics, you may have noticed that I contributed a large portion of his Skyrim segment on the PS3. In other words, not only do I still have that footage, but I also was able to finish the game faster on that save file, just so I can get this review out to you sooner. You're welcome. I should also mention that I'll only be looking at the vanilla version of Skyrim from its original 2011 release, so I won't look at the DLC. Skyrim, much like all open world RPGs, have various stories within the game. You play as an adventurer that's been caught up in a civil war between the Empire and the Stormcloaks. During the introduction of the game, you have been captured along with the rebels and their leader, Ulfric Stormcloak. The Empire is ready to take their zero-tolerance policy on adventuring seriously by putting you on the chopping block when a giant fucking dragon comes out of nowhere and serenades the entire town you're in to a lovely song of fire and melting skin. Later on, you discover that you are the legendary Dragonborn and have the power to absorb the souls of slain dragons and use thunes, or shouts. As you progress, you learn that the first dragon you've seen is Alduin, and he was cast forward through time by the ancient Nords with the use of the Elder Scroll.
So an older generation decides to throw off its massive, unstable problems that can affect the world on a younger generation. That sounds a lot like what the baby boomers are doing to the millennials today. Tell me I'm wrong!
Alduin isn't some everyday dragon though. He is the leader and main asshole of all the dragons. His asshole powers are so strong that it revives dead dragons. And he has the power to om nom nom on the souls of dead people. So you need to use the Elder Scroll to learn a fuck you dragon shout, kick the crap out of Alduin, then literally follow him into the afterlife and kick his ass again. Talk about being thorough. Being an RPG, Skyrim has a ton to offer in customization alone. You can choose your race and many fine visual details, but the real fun comes from the skills. There are 3 main skill categories: Warrior, Magic, and Thief. Each category has a number of specific skills to add perks to after you level up, and these skills are vital to your survival. Enemies progressively get harder as your level increases, and your perks can give you a huge advantage, especially if you choose a combination of different elements. Personally, I always invest in the sneak skill in either one-handed weapons or archery, for reasons that I'll get to shortly. Along with enemies, the items that you can randomly find in chests also increases as you level up, so be sure to go after everything that even remotely looks like a chest. That's not what I had in mind, but okay. Being the Dragonborn, you have the ability to use shouts after absorbing dragon souls and finding the words of power. These words can be given to you by allies or by finding them on ward walls, which are typically guarded by either the Draugr or a dragon. There's a lot to do in Skyrim, and there's absolutely no shortage of side quests. These side quests can be initiated at almost any time, and I highly encourage doing a few to enhance certain abilities before taking on the main storyline. One of these side quests is to fight for either the Empire or the Rebellion to ensure that the Civil War comes to an end. This is a pretty big simplification of the game's structure, but there's so many details that it would take me hours to cover them all. When it comes to critiquing Skyrim, there's a lot I can cover, both the good and the bad. Let's start with the things that just make Skyrim absolutely amazing. The amount of customization for both battle and aesthetics alone make this game worth going back to, just to try something different. There's almost always something to do in Skyrim, even if it's just taking in the gorgeous landscape. Speaking of which, this game is, unsurprisingly, freaking massive. From what I understand, the game isn't as big as Oblivion, but it doesn't change the fact that this game feels big, and it feels alive. Towns both big and small have people that you can interact with, but it can get a little annoying when you pass by a townsperson and they say some random gibberish at you as though they were reading their fanfiction aloud. Combat's straightforward as well, simply hack or shoot the enemy until they stop moving, and there's quite a few enemies to take out, from the undead all the way up to the predatory animals. The best part about the combat is the fact that most enemies progress with you, so in many cases combat isn't restricted to just weak enemies, or worse, a sudden super enemy that can one-shot you with his toe. Another fantastic thing about Skyrim is the level of depth it has. I can't say for the previous games obviously, but the lore in this game doesn't just delve into the story, but also philosophy. At face value you might not see much, but if you pick up a few books or spend some time with Parthenax, the world around you really begins to fill you with a deeper understanding, and that really adds to the immersion. This is what makes a good story into a great story. It's not just what you see around you, but also the legends that make a story like this feel possible. The last great thing about Skyrim I want to mention is the music. Holy shit, this soundtrack is amazing. Great ambience where it's needed and superb battle music all the way up to the dragons you encounter. Skyrim's music composer is Jeremy Soule, and he did a knockout job for this game. But for all the amazing things about Skyrim, there are some amazingly bad things about it too. First and foremost, you can't have a game this large and this complex without bugs and glitches, and Skyrim is notorious for them, to a point where it's hilarious. Don't believe me? Check out this clip from a GDQ event.
So the game's already broken. I now have infinite stamina, which is pretty useful, and I can also jump while sprinting, which lets me just kind of skip over this guy and get on the Wells of Helgen, which is pretty nice.
Very rarely do I encounter a bug that actually breaks the game, but the bugs in general will always give a game problems in one form or another. Why won't you die? Though this doesn't pertain to the main storyline, I want to address the civil war between the Empire and the Stormcloaks. Basically, you have the option to choose either side to fight for, but if you choose neither side, then you will need to go through a long series of conversations just to get a truce organized. I would go fight for an army, but that not only pads out the runtime, but the main problem is that neither army has the real moral high ground. On one hand, you have the Empire, whom try to kill you at Helgen and is pretty much subjugated by the malevolent Thalmor. Then you have Ulfric Stormcloak, whom sends you off to die just to prove that you're even worth initiating. In fact, Ulfric wants to take back Skyrim for religious purposes even though it originally belonged to the Snow Elves, used underhanded tactics to kill the reigning High King, and wants Nords to control Skyrim despite the severe racism that currently exists, even within the walls of his own city. In other words, Ulfric Stormcloak is a much more capable Donald fucking Trump. The only redeeming thing about Ulfric is that he really does seem like a man of wisdom. When he speaks, I actually want to hear what he has to say. One thing that you'll also learn early on is that there is a lot of downtime in some form or another, either between heavy dialogue dumps or traveling the region on foot. Sure, you can fast travel or use a carriage to get to any of the capitals, but it's those off the beaten path locations that are a bitch to get to. And don't get me started on how the beautiful landscape can be a real pain in the dick to navigate around. Then we get to the skills that are completely broken. I mentioned that I recorded footage for Fawful's Top 10 video, and this is why. The sneak skill is by far the most broken skill, to a point where you can have an enemy a few feet in front of you, looking at you, and they don't see you. It gets even more broken when you have armor that increases these skills. Not to mention that the enemy AI can be quite on the uneducated side. Since certain skills like sneak are so broken, you can use this to your advantage to manipulate enemies. And speaking of enemies, I am fucking tired of fighting Draugr. If there's one enemy that you'll be very familiar with, it's these undead assholes. Most if not all quests at some point have you go underground to retrieve some sort of artifact from the ancient Nords, and their corpses are waiting to fight. And these underground areas are not small, they're freaking huge. If you're a stealth-based person like me, that means a lot of time patiently waiting to snipe these pricks from a distance. one at a time. And it doesn't help that places both above and below ground are unusually dark at default brightness setting, so it's often hard to see certain things of importance. But here's the biggest problem with Skyrim, and ironically it has more to do with Bethesda. I got curious because when scripting the history section of this script, I wasn't sure what Bethesda game studios made outside the Fallout series and most of the Elder Scrolls. So I took a peek on their Wikipedia page and found this. From what I see here, there's only 3 series of games that are being directly made by Bethesda game studios. The rest of the games were made by Bethesda Softworks, and even then the last game they actually made was back in 2006. Every other game that's on the list appears to be only published by Bethesda Softworks. If this information is up to date, then this means that Bethesda has been making a lot of its money off of the other studios that are owned by the same parent company, as well as Skyrim specifically. And that gets me into the problem itself. Skyrim has been re-released and ported numerous times since 2011, including a special edition version that's even buggier than the original. And with Skyrim now coming out on the Nintendo Switch, it's pretty obvious that Bethesda is milking the ever-living fuck out of Skyrim like a pregnant prostitute. As far as I can tell, if you withhold the DLC, the only real differences between the ports and the re-releases is only a slight graphics upgrade and maybe a little more content. Just imagine if Nintendo re-released the Ocarina of Time with only a graphical upgrade and barely any new content. Okay, bad example. Imagine if Sony re-released Crash Bandicoot with only a visual oh god damn it. Fine, you wouldn't see Microsoft doing the same thing with Halo, son of a bitch! Okay, it's clear that Bethesda isn't the only company that does this, but one must admit that they're basically the poster child at this point to what amounts to a money-grabbing scheme. Give these other companies some credit, at least they have a decent list of original IPs instead of publishing every game that can be hoard. For all its faults, the positives about Skyrim far outweigh its flaws. Skyrim is a gorgeous game and well worth most if not all of its praise. I will say if you own an older console or a PC and don't have it yet, I highly recommend it. Just don't get this game for the Switch on its eventual re-release. There's almost no point to getting it on that platform except perhaps increasing your Switch game library. Getting a re-release version of Skyrim now is only throwing money at Bethesda's feet, especially since you can get a perfectly good used or refurbished copy at a GameStop or something. More importantly though, a game developer should be focused on making new and better games, not repurposing an old game numerous times. You can take all this with a grain of salt, but at the end of the day I want to make sure that the people that are taking my money are not stagnating and are actually putting effort into making something new. To be fair, Bethesda Game Studio has made a new Fallout game within the last couple of years, but that's still one of 3 series that they've really continued on.
It's time to announce the results of the straw poll. And you guys got me into a little bit of a jam. First off, I want to thank those that voted in the Edgeathon, and I just want to say that I hate you just a little bit. Shadow the Hedgehog is currently in the lead at just under 50% of the votes. But I'd be skipping over Sonic Heroes, the previous game. Now normally I wouldn't do this, but for an edgy-based list of games, it just doesn't feel right not to have the king of edge itself, Shadow the Hedgehog. But, as luck would have it, the next 3 games on that list, which are Twilight Princess, Infamous, and Batman Arkham Asylum, are all basically neck and neck. In fact, the last 2 are tied even. Because I only want to have 3 games to review in total, this is what I'm going to do. And the reason why I hate you guys just a little bit. I'm going to keep the poll open until the next review. That way I could take a look at Sonic Heroes and to put Shadow the Hedgehog in context. So, this is what this means. I'm going to be looking at 2 Sonic games back to back. Damn it. So, the next time we meet, we are going to be taking a look at Sonic Heroes. And I'll see you then. Fuck my life.